Good morning. Today I have Psalm 46 to read to you. It'll be found on page 883 in your Bibles or up on the screens on either side. For the director of music of the sons of Korah, according to Alameth, a song. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." This is the word of the Lord.
The Christian tradition as both the book of prayer and the book of music for the church. These psalms many a times were used as hymns for the church. They still are used as hymns for the church. And so when you read something like, say, 1 Kings, of which some of the historical parts of this psalm was written in, I think it was during the time of Hezekiah, I think it was 1 Kings 19 and 20. So you can read the backdrop of it, but this isn't like reading history. This is reading more the background context of the poetry. You can read a book of Romans and read a lot of theology and theological truths, and the Psalms are more birthed out of those truths than just a mere, here are 3 points and 3 things we learn about God in this sermon. We have to let poetry breathe. We have to let it speak to us on its own terms. And to understand some of the context and the way it's been used through history. The way that some of the background that we know with some level of certainty that is the background of this psalm is a time when there was a fear that the Assyrians were going to conquer Jerusalem. And the way they would have done that is through a siege. Assyria, if you're going to be conquered by anybody in history, which is, already a list you don't want to be on, but Assyria, even in that list, even in that company, Assyria would be at the bottom. They would be known, they understood psychological warfare. They knew that if people were afraid of you and the word spread about the kinds of things you did to your enemies, if you, say, skinned generals alive, or, say, took kings, put hooks in their lips and in their nose so you could drag them through town like a puppet to demonstrate your dominance in the world, or say when you went into a place that you had besieged and they had dared to defy you, just killed indiscriminately, tortured, maimed, said, we don't need prisoners of war today. We don't need new citizens of our country. What we need to do is send a message to everyone. When we come knocking on your door, open the door. It's just going to be easier for everyone. And so what you had in that moment was a sense of dread. Assyria has conquered the northern tribes, and we're next on their list. It was the Babylonians that did it later, but the point of this passage is there was a time where they feared the Assyrians were going to come and besiege the city. And it's birthed out of what we would call an age of anxiety. It's not a matter of if we're conquered, it's when and how bad it's going to be. How long we can live before that they just come and what the consequences are going to be, and if we'll even be a people after that. So you talk about existential dread. This is the original, we may cease to exist if the Assyrians come our way. this psalm was birthed in that moment. And it's always been used, it's always spoken to people in times of dread. In the 14th century, that was the time of the Black Death, or the Black Plague swept through Europe. Did you know? Because I sure didn't until I thought, I'm going to do some research on that this week. You know how many people died in Europe during the Black Plague? At minimum, 75 million, and up to 200 million, which would represent 30 to 60% of the population. The best guess we have is that the Black Plague in a 4-year period killed about half of all Europeans. Imagine a time when a plague like that came through and you were fearful of your neighbor. It started with rats coming into town with fleas that carried it, that bit people, and then they got sick, but most people got infected by their neighbor or somebody in their household. Think about the scenarios you play out in your head. If I get it, I'm just going to abandon my family. I can't risk infecting. I'm not going to say goodbye. I'm just going to leave. To the neighbors, to every moment, you're like, it's just a matter of time before death comes knocking on my door. Psalm 46 is one of the psalms that we know in that time people gravitated towards. We also know, by the way, that during the Black Plague and during the plagues of the first 3 centuries of Christian tradition, Christians died at a higher rate than non-Christians. During the Black Plague, the priestly class of people died at a higher rate than the normal people, and of course, the other people that died quite a bit was the nurses and doctors during that time. There was a kind of a primitive medicine back then. Guess who started, by the way, hospitals? Guess whose idea was, hey, we should have a place to care for the sick and people dedicated towards helping heal them people. These are all Christian ideas. That's why so many hospitals in town have religious names to them. And when Rodney Stark wrote his landmark book, The Rise of Christianity, he was trying to count for how do we count for a 300-year period from the Christianity starting with one person and a handful of disciples into 300 years later takes over Rome and becomes the official religion of Rome. There's no precedent for that. That's never happened before in history. We've never seen the growth of religion that quickly. How do we understand it? One of the chapters of his book is about how Christians responded when a disease came into town and how people would be nursed back to health by their Christian neighbor who would take that disease and die, and the person would live, and then say, well, I guess that's a pretty compelling case for Christianity, somebody who's willing to die for me. One of the chapters of Rodney Stark's book, The Rise of Christianity, that accounts for how Christianity spread was Christians who treated their neighbor better than their neighbor's family treated them, who bailed on them when they got sick because they didn't want to get sick. So in this psalm, even when half the people are dying, is hope that people gravitate towards. The other time in history that you see, and I could have picked some other ones, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to think about the London bombings during World War II. And I was imagining what it would be like to live in London, hearing the air raid siren, knowing that the German bombers were coming. And for many people, hiding in the subway tubes, to go underground to protect the safety of underground, and then hearing all night long the bombs falling, electricity going out intermittently, bombs landing right overhead, shaking the place where you are, dust falling from the ceiling, lights going out. How did people sustain in that time? Why did church attendance during the bombings increase? What were pastors talking about? It was passages like this, where people are longing for consolation. And when I pick extreme examples like this to illustrate that in these extreme moments of history, when the Assyrians were going to come in and besiege God's people, or the Germans were bombing a city and people were hiding underground, or a plague was sweeping through, Psalm 46 is one of the psalms that people gravitated towards. It's a psalm for anxiety. It's a psalm for fear. It's a psalm for knowing at any moment things could change. And I'm aware of how vulnerable I am. I'm aware of something that's not going to go away, that if I make it to tonight, I'm going to wake up with the same fears again. It's not solvable right now. And as we live in what many have called an age of anxiety, how can we use psalms like this, the resources within it, to find the hope and peace described in here? Let's look at this psalm again through the lens of how do we find hope and peace in this psalm. So, first question, where do we see God? What is the role of God in this psalm? How is he portrayed by the psalmist? Well, he's the beginning, middle, and the end of the psalm. He is at the beginning that he is a help, an ever-present help in a time of trouble. So when you think about God as an ever-present help, and you think about a people who are praying against an Assyrian invasion or bombs falling on their homes or a plague coming to their home, you would think, let me just ask you, what would you pray for? I would pray for deliverance, right? I'd pray for safety, protection, shielding, put a wall between me and that thing. And this psalm has always been gravitated towards times when sometimes that happened. You come out of the subway and you're safe, you made it another night. And sometimes it didn't. The plague comes to you. In either case, this psalm is a source of help. And what you see, this promise of God as the help, as a helper, an ever-present help. Then what's the next image? The next image is of the world collapsing all around the person. It's not an image of Eden, of walking into green pastures and quiet waters. This is more the valley of the shadow of death side of Psalm 23. This is a time where things are collapsing all around the psalmist, all around the people of God. And as the world dissolves, as everything falls apart, as the fury of the enemies of Israel and as the fury of death and decay rage around them, there still, even then, is a peace. You know, I've been into some hospital rooms, and one of the things when I was a young pastor, some of you say you're still a young pastor. You're cute, but no, I'm not. I would always think I had to go into these spaces where the world was collapsing around a person to bring hope. And I always wrestle with, do I pray for healing and deliverance? So I come with assurance, like, God's got this, God's got you, when this diagnosis is pretty severe? Do I come with that hope? Do I try to excuse and explain away to God? You know, sometimes God's plan is confusing to us and things are hard and we don't always understand it, know it, and we have to look at the bigger picture. Do I do that? Do I come in with apologetics? What do I do? And what I've found over and over again is I open the door to that room and hope's already there. It came without me. It had come before me and it's lingered after me. And all I'm called to do is just give that hope a name, draw attention to it, and be grateful that it's there. That's the picture of this psalm, is of our world collapsing all around us. And yet, God is a refuge. But still, God is a source of help and of strength. What the image of this psalm, kind of at the middle of the psalm, is an image of a river. And if you know anything about a siege, which I'm among some big siege experts right now, but a city on a hill is great for a siege, right? You know, if you're on a hill and there's a wall around your city, you have a lot of tactical advantages. But the one problem, the one challenge of a city on a hill is water doesn't flow up that hill. Water is your biggest problem. And when somebody like Assyria would come to a place like Jerusalem, they would say, well, obviously we're not going to scale the walls here. We're going to cut off their sources of water and wait them out, and it's not going to take very long before they open the door to us, just out of pure physical need for water. And so what you have in the image at the center of the psalm is a river. The one thing you need that'll ensure that you make it through the next day is water. Water is the sustenance of life. Water is something you can pull food out of. Water is something that will water the trees and gardens all around you so you can have food. Water is an image that begins rivers in the early chapters of Genesis. Genesis 2 talks of headwaters flowing through Eden, feeding Eden. In Ezekiel 47, you have an image, a vision, a prophetic vision that Ezekiel gets of water flowing from the temple to water all the land. Revelation, another prophetic book, you have the promise of water flowing, feeding the tree of life, that tree healing the nations. Jesus, in John chapter 4, talking to a woman at a well who's thirsty, and he says to her, "Get water from me, and you'll never thirst again." That's the water the psalm is talking about. It's a living water. It's a source of water that nothing can take away from the people of God, that those who are faithful. Part of the comfort and the source is as the world is collapsing, I have water, I have a refuge in God. And even though the world collapses around me and I might get swept up in it, for now, I'm safe in God's care and protection. And where it ends is be still and know that I am God. So if you picture this, the flow of this psalm, at the beginning, you have a God who is an ever source of help, that God is with those who are suffering and crying out to him, that he is a refuge for them. He provides water for them. But then the psalmist shifts into being still and knowing, I'm God. That's it. I am God. And that in the end, all the earth and all the nations of the earth will exalt me. This is where I want to end, with this final image. You have the world collapsing, God being present, God providing water for his people. You have historically people looking at this text, finding a source of hope. This end is ultimately where we get our hope from. And what he says is, be still. It's like quiet in a world of noise. Be still. The world's collapsing all around you. Be still. And know that I'm God. I will be exalted in all the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth. What are the two examples I picked from history? One is an example of death and disease. The other is an example of warfare. What are the two places God promises he'll be exalted? All the nations. That in the end, and this is the further clarification that Revelation gives us, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. This is the exaltation. Christ is Lord. That Jesus is who he said he was, the full representation of God to us. And every knee will bow and every tongue confess. When we are in a time where we see the death and destruction that a small handful of people do in the world, and we see and think about the suffering, everything from the bombings and the displacement of war, the refugees moving all over the world, the suffering of parents holding their children amidst the rubble, saying, my kid didn't do anything wrong, to victims of school shootings and of violence. And we cry out and say, won't somebody do something about this? This final image is an image of all the people that have ever existed saying to God, you are the ultimate source of authority. You are right. And coming into a place where God speaks the final word over them. We call that judgment. We call them that holding people to account. But the only way that we can trust that that we can respond to evil in ways that aren't violent, that aren't tearing down the bad people and hoping that that fixes things. The only way we cannot take revenge ourselves is this being still and knowing in the end, God will have the final word. All the wars will cease. All these are that you need not worry about somebody getting away with it. in the end, God will be exalted. And then it moves from every nation, which is the people and all the ways that nations are formed, into the earth. All being healed by God. I'm next door. Pastor Craig is doing a series this whole year on dementia. And so he was sharing with me some of the statistics about dementia, how it's growing, how we should anticipate over the next 10 years this becoming a major health crisis in our country. We, from cancer, claiming so many. When we look at the loss and the grief that we face, the hope that's found in this text, whether it's no more Alzheimer's, no more cancer, no more eyewear or knee braces or back braces, that God will heal all the world. And when we look at the pain and suffering all around us, the invitation of the psalm is, be still and know that someday soon it will all be healed and all will be made well again, and all you've lost will be returned to you. How do we endure the constant and persistent threats that we face? One, God is with you. And two, be still, know he's God. Like beyond the personal, he's with you, he's walking with you, he's a fortress. Beyond all the pastoral ways, God is present. The end says, but don't forget, he's God. He has the last word. All will be held to account. All will be healed. Every manner of thing will be well. So the only way to end this sermon is to create an opportunity, an invitation, just for a moment, for us to be still, to know he's God, and then come to the table. So let's just take a moment of silent prayer, and I'll close us in prayer as we head to the table.